Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you guys are having a good day. Today we're going to kick off what I am going to call End Week, in which we're probably going to do a bunch of projects in the end. But we're going to start off with something that will lead into the end, but is going to be a more general topic. We're going to take a look at mob movement, in particular how players can move mobs around the most easily to get them where you want them to go. And this is kind of a useful thing to have in survival, not least for producing stuff like cow farms, but also in the case of hostile mobs that you might want to be in very specific places, or sometimes even just to keep hostile mobs contained, to get them out of the way while you're doing something else. And so we're going to take it step by step. There are a whole bunch of different ways to basically guarantee that mobs are going to move the way you want them in this game, and that's what we're going to cover today. Starting off, I think, with passive mobs. We're going to, start at a low difficulty level and increase it from there. So let's go down to the animal pens over here, where I have a few sheep and cows, and probably a few chickens and stuff like that hanging out, and we'll see what we can do to get them moving. To start off with, when you first begin a game of Minecraft, you don't really have that many resources, but one thing that should be easily accessible to you when you start the game is various types of crops, and those are the things you need to move most passive mobs around. Passive mobs being the farm animals, the pigs, the sheep, the cows, that kind of thing. And holding wheat in your hand is usually a pretty safe bet for moving around cows and sheep, because wheat is what they eat. You'll notice a lot of these guys are getting very interested in what I'm holding. Now, the maximum range that they will be attracted to wheat being held by a player is 8 blocks, and so you'll find this gets a little bit less reliable at longer distances. After a while, they sort of forget about you, like that chap over there seemed to, and eventually you'll find it gets a little bit frustrating to pull the cows around with wheat all of the time, especially if you're herding a large amount of them at once. You can double up on your chances for a cow to notice you by, if you're playing Java Edition, holding wheat in your offhand by hitting F to transfer it into the offhand and then grabbing another one there to hold in your main hand as well. The double wheat method. And you can dual wield or dual wheat your way to having a whole herd of cows, because they'll probably be twice as likely to notice you if you've got 2 sheaves of wheat in your hand. For now, we're going to put those away and talk about the other types of foods, which are the preferred food of various other animals. If we spot that pig who is up here, where's that pig with the saddle gone? I do need to corral it at some point and probably put it in here with the horses. But as you'll notice, the sheep isn't really paying much attention to me while I've got a carrot in my hand, whereas the pig is very interested. And pigs are interested in all the other types of crops that kind of grow in the same way as carrots do. They've got potatoes, they've got beetroot, they are interested in all of these. But as you saw just then, it takes a second or two for them to catch up to you once you've got it there in your inventory. But once you've got that, pig should follow you no problem. There we go, we've got another mount in there. The pig doesn't quite have the armor that the horses do, but he's still an absolute champion. So, of course, beetroots, potatoes, and carrots are all accessible quite early. You get them from villages or occasionally from zombies. You get beetroot from loot chests, you get seeds, and wheat seeds are another thing that is used to move passive mobs around. In particular, chickens are attracted to wheat seeds, so you will find yourself being able to move them around nice and easily in much the same way. As you can see, all of these chickens are getting very interested in the fact that I've got some seeds on me, but I'm not interested in you. Get away. As you might expect, rabbits are also interested in carrots, but did you know they're interested in dandelions too? If you find some of these yellow flowers out here on the plains, or basically anywhere that you can bone meal the grass, you'll be able to generate some dandelions. There you go, there's one. We could use this to attract a rabbit if we wanted to, and I'm pretty sure you can also use them to breed. That is the key to understanding the types of foods each animal's like, is it's also the type of food that they use to breed. With the exception, I suppose, of horses. Horses can't really be lured around using any kind of food. They don't tend to follow you if you've got food in your hand. Instead, we move on to the next form of transport for passive mobs, leads. Leads can be used to drag around basically as many animals as you like, although the limits of leads typically are more like the limits of physics. For example, if you end up dragging around an absolute ton of cows like this, but the cows get 10 blocks away from you because of the sheer mass of animals you are dragging, that's when the leads will start to break, because much like the radius with wheat, the radius of a lead is about 10 blocks, and that's where you'll find a little bit of frustration coming in with some animals getting caught on blocks, not being able to pathfind over them properly, and getting lost along the way. But you will find that leads While they're not super accessible at the beginning of the game because you need slime balls in order to craft them, you can pinch them from wandering traders if you kill them or their llamas, or occasionally the llamas will separate from them in transit and they will drop a lead as a result of that. And all you need to do to detach the leads is just right-click on the animal that you had leashed, and you are good to go. So I've let out a couple of cows there just by virtue of this gate being open, but leads can be pretty useful, and passive mobs are not the only thing that can be dragged around using leads. In Bedrock Edition, it is possible to leash a squid. It isn't possible in Java Edition, though. I'm right-clicking on this one now, and it's not really doing a whole lot. Likewise, fish. You know, it doesn't seem particularly logical that you'd be able to carry fish around on a lead, but you never know. In this case, not possible. And you might think that's the case with all underwater animals, but no, it is possible to leash dolphins. That is, if you can get up to them. There we go. You can actually encourage this dolphin to swim around with you if you've got it attached to a lead, which can be very useful because, as you may know, dolphins are the unique possessors of this special effect they can give you if you're swimming near them, called Dolphin's Grace. And that's going to be very useful to us later on. So I kind of need to check out... Oh, hello, we've got some drowned approaching us. We can't leash these guys either. But I kind of want to know how long Dolphin's Grace lasts for. It's only about 5 seconds. Okay. Interesting. That is information we will need a long way down the road, but it is good to know. But in the meantime, if you want to use Dolphin's Grace to get around, for example, you could make some really fast underwater transport if you had dolphins kind of measured out over a certain range to keep that Dolphin's Grace effect going. And that would be possible to get them into certain areas using leads. So I recommend giving it a try. Leash a dolphin next time you're around. And all you need to do is swim far enough away from them, the leash will detach and they'll be able to swim on. In addition to that, it is possible to leash things like polar bears, which are technically neutral mobs, which will attack you if you attack them and aren't really like passive in the same way that farm animals are. So if you want to bring a polar bear back to your base, if you want to put it in a zoo or something like that, then you can do that. You might also remember the unique properties of our friend the llama, who can be ridden but cannot be controlled while ridden. Instead, you right-click on them with a lead and you can bring them around, and other llamas nearby will join the caravan of up to 5 or possibly even up to 10 llamas. I forget the maximum limit of these guys since I don't use them that often, but it is possible to bring a whole bunch of llamas with you with just the one lead. So in the early days when leads are a little scarce, that might be an option for you. Although unfortunately a llama won't do you much good when you're being pursued by a horde of mobs, so I'll probably let these guys go and try and make it daytime. 2 more cases in which leads can be used are iron golems and snow golems. These two can both be led around using the conventional leads, which might seem a little strange to you at first, leading around these giant hulking mammoths, but that can be useful in order to get them where you want them. However, bear in mind that, as I've noted in previous videos, Iron Golem AI goes a little bit strange after they have been led around, and they may not react to mobs in quite the same way without you logging in and logging out. But that's a bug. That's something we can ignore for the long term because that will probably get fixed in Java Edition fairly soon, and probably isn't a problem in Bedrock Edition at all. Likewise, snow golems can be led around, which can be useful if you want them to put snow in specific areas. You can always drag them around to complete a patch of snow that they have not quite got completely covered with their random pathfinding. If you're decorating for a winter scene or a Christmas tree or something like that, you can always drag these guys around a little bit. But the rest of the time, they will roam around and happily pathfind their way through the landscape, leaving this trail of snow behind. This works, by the way, for both player-generated golems and villager-generated golems, which are different in that if you make one as a player, they will never become hostile to you even if you accidentally give them a tap, whereas the villager-generated golems will fight back if you hit them. I'm sorry, big guy. It was just for the demonstration, I promise. One other important aspect of using leads on mobs is that they are actually capable of being tied off to fences. Not only that, but if the fence is a little bit high up for where the mob is in the world, you'll find that they still dangle from that fence a little bit. So let me give you a quick example. If I can hop up here and not have this chicken follow me. There we go. I think I've managed to move it around. If I tie it off to this fence here, it will actually get stuck here, and, well, the trapdoor is in the way. It's kind of bouncing up and down over there, so this might not have been the easiest way to explain this one. I'm going to just borrow this fence post for a minute, lads. Try not to die for a second, and let's see if we can place this fence post, I don't know, up here on the edge of the trading hall, like so. Now, if I drag this chicken over here and tie it off to the fence, like so, it's actually hanging from a thread. That lead is going straight up, and the chicken will not be able to pathfind too much further away. Not only that, but if I take the stuff out from under it, there we go. That has reached the end of the leash length, and the chicken is quite harmlessly bouncing up and down in the air here. It even has a little bit of momentum, so we can push it from side to side and they will swing a little bit. And now in order to get the chicken off of that, we need to right click on the fence again to break the lead, which is apparently easier said than done. Yep, there we go. Have to be standing on the ground to do it. There we go. One more noteworthy case is that villagers are not animals. Technically, they are Minecraft's closest analog to people, apart from the player, and so leading them around with a leash will not work. For a start, if you right-click on them, you end up getting into their trading interface, but even if you shift and right-click on them, you can't use a lead on them. You can shift and right-click to name them if you've got a name tag in your hand, but leads do not work. So there's your answer to that one, if anyone's been mentioning that in the comments. By the way, even if a villager doesn't have a trading interface, unemployed villagers, nitwits, that kind of thing, it's the same deal. You can't even put reins on kids if they're running around everywhere. You just have to let them run. Or do you? Because as we have seen, it is possible to stop villagers running around quite so much by putting them inside a boat or a minecart. And that is something we're going to come back to after we've explored the basics of moving hostile mobs around, because boats and minecarts are pretty universal in their ability to trap mobs in place, and there are some very useful cases for this, which we will go into in a short while. But for now, it's just past the middle of the day, and I need to wait for it to get dark so I can tell you a little bit about the basics of moving hostile mobs around. So I'm going to wait for it to be night, and I'll join you guys then. Nighttime is upon us, which sadly means that these two probably will not last very long. There are some nasties coming out as we speak. We got a creeper and a skeleton over here, a couple of skeletons here, there might be a zombie or two around. And now it's time to talk about hostile mob movement, and possibly one of the easiest ways to get hostile mobs where you want them to go is just by drawing their aggro. Aggro is kind of shorthand for their aggression, and it means that a mob is targeting you and plans to attack you in some way or another. In the case of this creeper, it'll just walk towards us until it explodes. In case of skeletons, they will see you from a distance, try and keep their distance, and attack you with a bow. So when you get closer to skeletons, you will find them trying to back away from you, and that can be used to manipulate them into a space where you want them to go. We've already been doing this a fair amount with creepers over here at the record farm, and of course we trapped a skeleton in there to begin with, so all of those rely on mob aggro in order to draw the creatures in. And in the case of zombies, for example, they will target you from quite a distance and be able to track you across the world. And you'll notice that we can't use leads on these guys. They are just going to come up and hit us regardless, but we don't have the option to drag them around even if they were not hostile to us. And as I said, the Iron Golem is having a bit of a hard time pathfinding to that skeleton. So let's see what happens if I log out and log back in. There we go. Instantly it starts running at the skeleton. Skeleton gets owned. Good job, Golem. Looks like you're probably going to survive another night. But yeah, in the majority of cases, you will find hostile mobs typically track towards the player. Now there are, as usual, a few exceptions to this, because Minecraft is one of those games where there are always exceptions to everything. Let's take Endermen as an example, although now I'm taking them as an example, I'm probably not going to be able to find one walking around here. Oh, no, there is one over there in the trees. And you can only get Endermen to aggro on you if you sort of make eye contact with them, or make eye contact with a certain portion of their body. Sort of the torso upwards is fair game. If you look at an Enderman's legs, whoa, there we go, then they're not going to mess with you, but in this case, this guy seems to have come over and attacked us because I looked at his torso and head. And that is the way that you get Endermen to track towards you, although at that point, they become very unpredictable, especially around water, but even outside of water, they will teleport around in an attempt to get to the player and in an attempt to avoid attacks. So Endermen tend to be a bit of a special case, and there are, in fact, ways of trapping them in one place that makes it a lot easier to deal with them, which we'll cover a little bit later on as we go into a little bit more mob movement stuff. But for right now, having killed that example Enderman and not being able to see any more, I think we'll have to wait to demonstrate that. Instead, I'm going to go and get a boat, Because we've seen boats being able to be used to... Oh! Perfect timing. Okay, we've seen boats being able to be used to capture passive mobs and stuff like villagers. All we need to do is put a boat down in the vicinity of the hitbox of a passive mob, and it gets stuck in there. It is unable to move, and we can transport it around as the player. We've already done this a couple of times with villagers, but it works perfectly well for other passive mobs as well. Again, horses are an exception to this, but I'm pretty certain that the way you get a horse into a boat is to use a lead. So in combination with the lead, it becomes an effective thing for moving horses around as well. Now let's see if we can get this Enderman to walk off of this stair without it aggroing on me. There we go. Yes. Okay. So here is a neat trick for capturing Enderman. All you need to do is get them off of the stairs, first of all, and then have a boat nearby. Because if you just, whoop, let's try one more time here. Yes, there we go. Okay, we now have an Enderman actually rowing a boat with a zombie. I could not have called that, but it looks like the zombie has actually gotten into the boat as well. And the cool thing about this is now if we look at the Enderman, he's going to get angry, but he's not going to be able to teleport out at me. So, yeah, this is actually a very effective way of trapping Endermen if they become a nuisance to you, and it can be a very useful way of trapping them in the end. If they are aggro at you, but also if you just want to suspend them for a second in a boat while you do some other stuff around the end. If one of them is constantly annoying you like that. And it also makes them much easier to take out. It's very, very easy. Now we've got ourselves a zombie in a boat. The zombie is the sole passenger here. And the thing about getting in boats with hostile mobs is it holds about as much danger as you might expect a usual encounter with a hostile mob to have. If I get into the boat now, I'm driving this zombie around, but he is still attacking me. While his hitbox can collide with me as a melee attacker, he's going to be able to damage me. And so this is not the ideal situation. However, as you just saw, other mobs will be able to get into the boats too, and if you leave boats around your world, this is typically what happens. They fill up with mobs of all kinds. You get creepers in here, you get chickens, you get rabbits, all sorts of stuff will just end up hopping into a boat simply because its pathfinding takes it in that direction, following the player or just randomly moving around. Before the sun comes up, I'm going to try and demonstrate something else. We've got some minecarts in there that we can also use for manipulating some of these mobs to move around, but I also want to take a look at mob pathfinding as an option, because in the case of something like this, for example, these zombies, if I take them out of the boat here, will not want to cross these rails, because as I've covered in previous episodes, mobs don't like to pathfind over rails just because it makes it more convenient for players to get around using minecarts. And so if we take these out there, you'll notice that as they're pathfinding towards me, they're not going to want to go over the rails. Instead, they are doing everything they can to pathfind away from the player before they pathfind back towards me. And so, yeah, they won't go into this area at all, or if they do, and they notice that I'm outside of that area, they're not going to want to cross the rails in order to get to me. It's quite fascinating seeing this in action, and it can be used to great effect if it's a reliable situation. Obviously, in the case of mobs like Enderman who can teleport, you can't really use that, and in terms of rails, you may as well be using minecarts to move stuff around anyway, but just on occasion, if you want to temporarily trap a mob and you've got some rails handy, it can be very useful to know that. And that can be used on all sorts of mobs. It's not just hostile mobs that are tricked by that pathfinding either. Most mobs will not want to cross rails, so you can use that on villagers, you can use it on chickens, on horses, whatever. But let's go back to boats for a second, because I want to impress upon you guys the sheer amount of mobs that you can put in a boat. I mean, 2 maximum per boat, but in terms of the range of mobs that you can transport, the boat becomes one of the most versatile and useful ways of transporting any kind of mob. And obviously, with the exception of mobs that are going to damage you, it becomes very, very handy. Even this llama, take this llama as an example. If I was having trouble leading it, and especially if we got to water where leading it was not really an option, I could take this llama in a boat. And not only then do I have portable transportation, if I shift click on the llama like so, I can get into its inventory, and we could have 9 shulker boxes in there containing all of the items I wanted to bring with me overseas, but also it means I can carry this llama with me anywhere, and I can go and pick up other llamas from other biomes and then bring them with me as well if I wanted to, although we could only fit 2 llamas in a boat at a time. So we're going to leave this llama here because I expect we will have some uses for him in future, and let's go and explore a few interesting cases of where a boat becomes invaluable. So I'm back here at the stronghold where I've actually destroyed the silverfish spawner that exists in the end portal room of every stronghold. But let's say, for example here, that I hadn't. And I still had some silverfish stone in the walls here and there. Now, silverfish stone looks like stone brick or regular, smooth, natural stone, and you'll find it occasionally occurring in strongholds where if you break a block, you'll end up with a silverfish popping out. I'm going to try and break a few blocks around here until I get one so I can demonstrate this next thing for you. There we go, we got one. Now let's see if we can trap this one in a boat. It looks like the boat disappeared. That is a glitch that occasionally happens. So let's try another one. Bam. Okay, now we have a silverfish in a boat, which is not much use to anybody, really. But this silverfish is now in this boat permanently. It cannot leave the boat even to exhibit its usual behavior of burrowing into the nearest acceptable block, whether that's stone brick or natural stone, cobblestone, anything like that. So what we have here is one trapped silverfish that could count towards the mob cap of our silverfish spawner. All we would realistically need to do is to trap about 10 or so silverfish in a location around that silverfish spawner, and the spawner would stay disabled. Anytime we came in here, even if we didn't want to break that silverfish spawner, it would not activate and spawn any more silverfish. That doesn't eliminate the possibility of there being silverfish in the other bricks of the stronghold, but it's just an example of how you can use boats for some interesting mechanics that aren't really available to us any other way. Of course, lighting up the spawner would do a similar thing, but that can be a little bit tricky in these here strongholds. Especially because when they spawn from spawners, silverfish need a light level of 11 or lower, so that's much brighter than your average spawner. It's about the same spawning amount as a blaze, so you would need to do some serious lighting up in here to make sure the place was spawn proof. Remember, that's 4 blocks higher than an average mob spawner for a zombie or a skeleton or that kind of thing. Now I'm going to see if I have a fishing rod in here, which I do, okay, because if you can target the hitbox of the mob itself, which is quite difficult in the case of this silverfish because it is quite small, it is sometimes possible to move them out of the boat. Alternatively, you can just move the boat around like this if you need to position it slightly more exactly and you don't want to get in the boat with the thing that's damaging you. Although that can be quite a long and intensive process, and you probably want to use minecarts for that kind of thing. But at least we got the silverfish out of the way, so I can go back to the nether, and we're going to see if we can catch ourselves another ghast. So as you may remember from the episode in which we brought a ghast to the overworld, ghasts can be moved around using fishing rods. It's a little bit difficult to do, and it does rely on the ghast being nearby in order for you to hook it properly. And aside from that, you need to be able to put a boat down reliably, and boats are quite easily destroyed by ghast fireballs. So in this case, I'm going to try and grab the ghast out of thin air. I need to get this boat on my hotbar. It's going to fireball me, but that's fine. I have blast protection on my armor. I am good for the moment. Okay, let's see if we can pull the ghast down, see if we can get it in the boat. Ghasts are... Okay, that one ended up getting exploded by its own fireball. What a shame. But ghasts can be quite easily gotten into minecarts, which is another thing that I wanted to try out at some point in this episode, but the conditions under which you can do this get a little bit tight sometimes. So I think we're going to abandon that for now. It was fun while it lasted. I also didn't need any of this stuff. Let's go back to the stronghold and try a different approach. So as you have now seen, it is a little bit difficult to get anything that causes explosions frequently into a boat, and that includes the wither. So you'll not find the wither being carried around in boats all that much. Although it would be pretty useful to stop it from flying around, I'm fairly certain the wither would just destroy the boat within seconds of you trying to trap it in there. So we need a slightly different strategy for the wither. We're just going to continue to trap it in bedrock as normal. But going out here to the outer end islands, there is one mob in particular that I'm looking to capture in a boat that's a really, really entertaining case. While I'm here, I might also try rowing a boat into one of these end gateway portals, and nope, it looks like we're just stuck in the bedrock now, huh? Yep. The boat seems to have gone through the portal, and I am very much stuck in this block. Interesting. Yeah, so in terms of things that are a bad idea to do, this comes top of the list for sure. I'm going to try logging out and logging back in again, but I'm a little bit scared about what's going to happen when I do. Oh, thank goodness. Oh, thank goodness. Okay, I got out of there. Turns out rowing into an end portal when you are a player, not the best idea. All right, let's have take 2 of this one. Well, when I went through the portal that time, I spawned underneath my boat and almost suffocated in a block. So that went well, and at least the boat was here, I suppose. And so were the arrows that I fired through. That's actually pretty cool. All right, speaking of arrows, I'm going to head in a this way sort of direction and try and find myself an end city, because you might have guessed it by now, but we are out looking for a shulker. And while this right here is an end city that I've clearly raided before, judging from the giant hole in the side of the city, we do still have a couple of shulkers hanging out in here, and quite literally hanging out in the case of this guy on top here. Now, I am going to do my best to remove him from the top just by causing him to teleport away, and let's see where he ended up. Is he on the side of the building? Time to play a game of spot where the bullet came from. It sounds like he's inside the tower somewhere. Right, perfect, he's down here. Okay, so all we need to do is walk up to this guy, plant a boat on top of there, and you'll find that if we row the boat into him a little bit, we now have a shulker in a boat. And that is quite an interesting sight, let me tell you. And the coolest thing about this is that he's going to try and attack the boat and make it levitate. But boats are immune to levitation, and the damage caused by the shulker pellet is not really impacting the boat at all. It's actually exploding on the block below it to no effect. So what we're going to do is try and drive this guy out of here. He will get a little bit stuck in blocks occasionally as we go around corners, so I've got to be careful not to suffocate him, and I'm probably going to get hit a couple of times by the other shulker bullets around here. While you're in a boat, you are unaffected by levitation as well, but the shulker will still cause damage to you. So I'll have to take care of this guy outside the door before we go too much further. However, as you can see, this guy's bullets are just getting fired straight into the ground, so he's not the one who's going to be doing too much damage to us. This is one of the few cases in which transporting a hostile mob might actually be quite easy when you're in the same boat. And one of the coolest things about boats is that when you're in them driving off the side of something, you don't tend to take any fall damage. So I can just hop down here, the shulker is totally fine, and I now have a shulker in a boat that I can ride away from the end city. So now we're out here with a shulker in a boat. What do we do with this guy exactly? Why do we have him in the first place? Well, the answer to that is actually in the advancements menu, hidden away somewhere inside of here, because there is a final advancement I want to get at some point in this playthrough, in which we have to have every single status effect in Minecraft all at once. And that usually involves either bringing a wither skeleton to the end, or bringing a shulker to the nether or the overworld, because you will end up needing a shulker's levitation effect to count towards one of the status effects you can get. And the only way to do that is have a shulker in the same place as all of the other effects you can get, which include stuff like mining fatigue. That includes a whole bunch of effects that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but they are status effects that are in the game and things that you need to be aware of. Wither is one of them, which you can get from wither skeletons, or now you can get it from suspicious stew. And there are a couple of other effects that are required from suspicious stew as well, but levitation cannot be gotten any other way. We'll need to bring it to some place at which we can perform this kind of ritual of getting all of the status effects at once, and that's going to take a while. So it's kind of a good idea to talk about mob transportation now, in case you guys want to try this at home. And of course, the next step is to bring it back to somewhere approaching the center of the world. Remember, if we want to get it to the overworld, the end return portal is at 0, so we have a long way to go rowing this guy in a boat. In fact, I would probably recommend finding the closest end city to your central island and creating some sort of long bridge that you could use to get the shulker back over there. Note that the bridge will also probably have a lot of endermen spawning on it if you don't light it up properly, or include some other kind of block on there like redstone or rails, which will stop mob spawns. But in the grand scheme of things, you are going to be rowing quite a long way with your shulker. Alternatively, we could try using minecarts, because it is possible to put a shulker inside a minecart, and it doesn't look like I have my minecart shulker box on me. I must have left that in the overworld. Oh, that sucks. Okay, let me see if I can find some iron or maybe an ender chest in here and get some backup gear out of one of those. And once again, an enderman has gotten into the boat, which could be a problem, but for now we're going to ignore that because we might end up taking the shulker out of the boat in just a second. I believe this might still be possible, though, if we end up pushing a minecart into these guys, because a minecart can actually have a boat as its passenger, and the boat can contain 2 mobs. So here we are with a minecart with 2 mobs inside of it, and I'm not certain if we can really push this all that much. I think it might still have some friction on the blocks to either side thanks to the boat being there, or the minecart might just have rolled off of the end of the rails. So if we can place down a couple of rails, yes, there we go, and now the boat is sort of driving this whole gizmo. It's a little bit difficult to tell exactly where the boat is going to go, but it has a little bit of momentum. Yep, there we go. It's picking up speed, and we can actually move these guys around. We're going to kill that shulker, but that's okay. I don't really need to worry about that. That was just for demonstration purposes, and oh, he's managed to push himself free a little bit. That's kind of great. And there we go. He's off. So the point of this demonstration is that we can move mobs around by having them ride both a boat and a minecart. Now, it is possible, if we get the shulker out of both of these forms of transportation, to just use the minecart. We can actually have a rail leading up to the shulker like so, and if I get rid of some of these bullets and probably get rid of the hitbox showing as well. Let's grab the minecart and try this again. Man, it's so difficult to do this when you're bobbing and weaving trying to get rid of the bullets, though. Let's push the minecart into the shulker, and there we go. We now have a shulker properly riding a minecart. And as before, it is not going to be able to break that minecart. The minecart is not going to be the subject of its attacks, but I think while it's in the minecart, it is still going to be able to fire at us, and it's quite difficult to push these guys onto the rails. So you might want to make sure that it's on the rails to begin with, but once again, with enough powered rail leading away from this shulker, you would be able to transport it all the way back across a bridge to the central end island where you could dunk it in the portal. Nope, looks like it has just destroyed the minecart. So I think in terms of the shulker itself, rowing it is probably going to be your best bet, and as you can see, it's definitely getting off a huge salvo of attacks at this point, which I'll just put him out of his misery, poor guy, but we will end up finding a closer end city through which we can boat a shulker home to the overworld, and we'll be able to use it for the How Did We Get Here advancement. But that brings us on to using minecarts for mob transport, which is possibly one of the more reliable things for moving hostile mobs around. By pushing a mob into a minecart, or pushing the minecart kind of into the mob front first, it is quite easy to pick stuff up using minecarts. I would recommend making sure the minecart has a fair amount of momentum so it doesn't just bounce off of the hitbox of the mob, and also using corners, because the hitbox of the minecart does some really interesting stuff when it reaches those corners. It stays in a square for a while. It doesn't really turn with the minecart, and that means that mobs on these corners actually get picked up by that part of the minecart's hitbox. As you can see there, the corner of it sticks out of the minecart model quite a way. And that means that if a mob is standing on this corner here, and that hitbox intersects with it, it's way more likely to be picked up. And then from here, as long as we've got enough rail, we can take this Enderman wherever we want to. And the Enderman is a nice easy case because it's not currently hostile to us, meaning it's not going to damage us if we walk into it. Whereas other mobs like Vindicators or creepers or zombies or anything else we want to push into a minecart, there is a hazard to the player if you end up going up here and actually pushing them manually. So that's where stuff like powered rail comes in. And powered rail is essential to moving mobs around in minecarts because it's a source of momentum for the minecart that you don't have to interact with physically. You can just light up some redstone next to it and cause it to push off in whatever direction the minecart is rolling at the time, meaning it becomes much easier to transport that mob without any kind of danger to the player. And as we fly back through the end, I'm going to explain to you a little bit about what we're going to do later this week, because with this being end week, we couldn't call it that without making an Enderman farm at some point. We're going to be making an Ender, and the best part of that is that what we've learned today comes in very, very handy. The best way to make an Enderman farm right now is to trap an Endermite in a minecart, and that will allow Endermen to pathfind towards it because they get aggressive towards Endermites and try to kill them, but we're going to have this Endermite trapped there, name tagged so it doesn't despawn, and protected, while the Enderman will fall into a gap in front of the minecart and be collected there for the player to attack while the Endermite remains safe. So naturally, I figured it was probably a good idea to get the basics of that kind of stuff out of the way before we did any serious work with Endermites and minecarts. We're going to be doing that later on this week. But for now, I'm going to return to the overworld and cover one thing that I feel like I missed earlier in the video that it was probably worth covering. And that is water. I hadn't really talked about this before, and I kind of take it for granted at this point, but water is one of the most effective tools for moving around mobs of any kind. There are, of course, limitations to how you can use water for this, but you'll find it a very useful tool, and is definitely not something to overlook in a video all about mob transport. So let's watch this zombie villager walk towards us, place water, it flows outwards, and the zombie villager is pushed back. A lot of mobs will be totally unable to fight the flowing current of a single water source. But there are exceptions to this, of course, because this is Minecraft, the game of exceptions. So I'm pretty sure anything that can teleport, including shulkers, will not be affected by water in the same way. They will be teleported away by any attempt to use water near them, much the same as Endermen will. Endermen will take damage from water, but they will try and teleport to safety, meaning that it's not a reliable mechanic to just push them around like this. Also, things that aren't affected by water flow, like squid and fish, aren't going to necessarily be affected by that kind of strategy. But a lot of other mobs are affected by water streams, and water streams are one of the most basic forms of transport once you've got yourself a decent amount of infrastructure in your Minecraft world, and especially if you want mobs from a spawner to be channeled into a killing mechanism, or if you want certain mobs to leave a villager breeder, say, and transport into a holding area where you can deal with them one at a time later, maybe using boats or minecarts as we've demonstrated in previous episodes. So that concludes our mob moving masterclass. I hope you guys have learned something today, and I hope you guys will be able to use this to great effect in your own worlds. And we're going to return to the end to do some cool stuff later on in the week. But for now, that's going to be it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.